Hogwarts will play host to a legendary event. The Triwizard Tournament.
I'm sorry to say that this is not the movie we will be reviewing today. However, I am quite pleased to say that it is not this movie either. As the narrator suggests, the movie we shall be reviewing is extremely unpleasant. Not due to the events that happened to the Baudelaire orphans, but because it is so horridly made. To put into perspective how horridly made this movie is, let us first take a look at the books this movie was based on. A Series of Unfortunate Events was a book series by Lemony Snicket, who is an in-universe character. A phrase which here means the character is documenting the events, but is never at any point in the story. The book series had quite a melancholy and gloomy tone, so, as the viewer of this seriously unfortunate movie will notice, that this movie was altered to be a comedy, in order to make the movie more child-friendly and appeal to a wider audience. The problem here is that words like gloomy, melancholy, and comedy are words that should never be used together. With that being said, let's take a look at Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. So as this movie opens up, we see the three Baudelaire children on Briny Beach, completely unaware that they are about to receive terrible news.
Children, I'm afraid I must inform you of an extremely unfortunate event. I'm very, very sorry to tell you this, but your parents have perished in a fire that's destroyed your entire home.
I will say this much to the movie's credit. Even though Mr. Poe is played by the never-wonderful Timothy Spall, and does not have his signature cough as he does in the books, he is still played quite well. Not exactly as a serious banker, but more of a complete idiot. So Mr. Poe takes the Baudelaire children, now the Baudelaire are orphans, to live with their closest living relative, Count Olaf, who is played by...
Hello, hello, hello. I am your beloved Count Olaf.
Oh dear. This movie's gonna be worse than I had imagined. Anyway. Who is played by Jim Carrey, whom I'm sure many of you will recognize him from such movies as...
Look, Ma! I'm Roadkill! Ha ha ha! Hey, get out of the road! I think he wants to communicate.
And he saw that it was good.
Think! Owie! Owie!
I cannot possibly imagine who in their right mind saw the potential of Count Olaf in Jim Carrey. And do not get me wrong, he is a talented actor. But in this movie he is horribly miscast, a word which here means he is the wrong actor for the character. So as Mr. Poe leaves the children in the hands of somebody who completely announces that he is going to abuse the orphans, we see a montage of the impossible chores that he leaves for the children while he disappears to rehearse for his play. When Count Olaf returns, we are introduced to his henchmen. Oh, sorry. I mean, his acting troupe. And demands that the orphans make dinner. So when the orphans do not cook roast beef for dinner, Count Olaf humiliates them in front of his acting troupe, aggressively grabs Sonny, smacks Klaus to the floor, and throws them into their room. I have once read that Liam Aiken had auditioned for Harry Potter but was rejected for Daniel Radcliffe. And this scene quite painfully shows why. This scene should have been a pivotal moment for the Baudelaire orphans. In the book, Klaus has a complete emotional breakdown and begins to cry. Violet herself also begins to cry at the sight of her brother in such a state of despair. The book even puts emphasis on how crying can be therapeutic in a troubling time, but in this movie, through terrible acting, the scene is completely lost. There is not nearly enough emotion as the audiences should be feeling for this scene. And that's assuming the viewer feels anything for this scene at all. Now this next part of the film is one that completely annoys me. For some reason the director Brad Soberling decided to skip over a very important plot point in the first book and instead put in this completely useless sequence of Count Olaf gaining custody of the Baudelaire children and stopping at a rest stop to get them all a treat, which turns out to be a ruse to trap them on railroad tracks inside the car. I can't possibly put into words how stupid this scheme of Olaf's is, so I'll just allow the always hilarious Peter Griffin to do that for me.
Damn it! Hey! Somebody! Hey! Sir! You see those keys there? Sir? Oh, screw you!
I'm sure many of you will notice that the movie has completely cut out the scene where Violet, Klaus, and Sonny visit Mr. Poe at his bank and try to tell him about Count Olaf's parenting methods, and Mr. Poe blows them off entirely. That should have been a big scene for the movie, but instead we get this half-assed alternate scene to the oatmeal breakfast scene, which is actually a ruse to get the Baudelaire fortune. But we'll get to that plot line later, as it will come back at the end of the movie. So after a pointless scene where Olaf loses custody of them, we are then taken to the events of the second book, The Reptile Room, where the orphans are introduced to yet another relative they've never heard of, Dr. Montgomery, or Uncle Monty as the orphans are asked to call him. Uncle Monty tells the children that they are going to be moving to Peru, so that they will be safe and well away from their past traumas. Unfortunately, that idea gets cut short by the arrival of Count Olaf, who is disguised as Uncle Monty's new assistant, Stefano. The orphans successfully warn Uncle Monty that he is an imposter, but fail to tell him that he is Count Olaf. So Count Olaf murders Uncle Monty and tries to blame it on one of the newly discovered snakes of his, the incredibly deadly viper. However, unbeknownst to the Count, the incredibly deadly viper was misnomered by Uncle Monty as a prank on the Herpetological Society, as it was actually quite friendly. When Mr. Poe and the detective find out that the viper is friendly, Count Olaf escapes from Uncle Monty's house with the hook-handed man, apparently while stripping as they ran.
He's naked somewhere.
So Mr. Poe takes the orphans to yet another relative to live with by the name of Aunt Josephine. This, I will have to admit, gives us one of the few jokes in the movie that is actually funny.
Aunt Josephine?
Never heard of her.
Does it strike you as odd that none of our relatives are related to us?
Then, we finally get to easily the best performance in the entire movie, Meryl Streep.
Is this a bad time?
In this movie, Streep is playing her character so pitch perfectly that it's quite enjoyable to watch. In the book, Aunt Josephine was a paranoid recluse who was afraid of everything from realtors to the stove to the doorknobs to the refrigerator. So the children decide to take Aunt Josephine into town to buy something for dinner and keep her mind off of her fears. While out in the market, they come across Count Olaf yet again. This time, he is disguised as a sea captain, properly named
Captain Shab. At your service.
Yeah, I heard that name too. So Count Olaf charms Aunt Josephine, and she invites him into her home and tells the children to continue shopping. When the children get back to the house, however, they find it completely empty and the wide window is shattered. They find a suicide note that Aunt Josephine left behind. The problem is, it's full of grammatical errors.
Grammar is the greatest joy in life, don't you find?
So Klaus figures out that the note, full of grammatical errors, contains a coded clue for the Baudelaires, hinting to them that she is hiding in Curdled Cave. So the kids track her down and find her hiding in Curdle Cave. They try to reason with her, but she refuses to go back and tell the authorities until Klaus reminds her that the cave is for sale and eventually realtors are going to come and look at the place. So Aunt Josephine agrees to go back with the Baudelaires. Klaus begins interrogating her about a page he found in her husband Ike's room, but the interrogation gets cut short when a swarm of lachrymose leeches start attacking the boat, smelling the banana that Aunt Josephine ate. They try to fend off the leeches, but are unsuccessful when Violet spots a boat containing Count Olaf. Count Olaf saves the children, but leaves Aunt Josephine behind to be eaten by the leeches, when Mr. Poe arrives with a detective. After Count Olaf pretends to save the Baudelaire children, Mr. Poe decides that Olaf is a capable guardian for the children after all, and gives him custody of the children yet again. This takes us not into Book 4, as one would expect, but to the second half of Book 1. I had mentioned earlier that I would come back to this scene where Count Olaf left the children on the railroad tracks. Well, in the original book, The Bad Beginning, the children go to Mr. Poe and try to tell him about Count Olaf's parenting methods, but Mr. Poe blows them off completely. The next day, Violet, Sunny, and Klaus wake up to find Olaf had prepared them a breakfast of oatmeal with raspberries. He tells them that they were his favorite growing up. The Baudelaires are suspicious of this, and Count Olaf explains that Mr. Poe had contacted him and told him about the children's concerns. So Count Olaf does this as a way to apologize to the Baudelaire children, and to make the apology sincere, he invites them to be part of his new play, The Marvelous Marriage. This is where the movie picks up where it left off.
Nothing in the world will keep the Count from his beloved bride. Nothing in the world will keep the Count from his beloved bride. Nothing in the world, nothing in the world, nothing.
Is it just me, or was this play written and composed by Dr. Otto Octavius?
Nothing will stand in our way. Nothing!
So Klaus figures out that Count Olaf is going to marry Violet for real, and Count Olaf reveals that if anything should happen to interrupt the play, he would kill Sunny. This, too, is actually holding true to the book. Shocking to think this movie is actually doing something right. Well, sort of. See, in the book, Klaus had figured out that Olaf wanted to marry Violet, for real, 2 nights before the actual play. Then the night before the play, Violet, not Klaus, invents a grappling hook out of an umbrella and some old neckties to try to save Sunny. I say that she tries to save Sunny because in the book she gets caught by the hook-handed man. In the movie, they decide that Klaus should be the one to save Sunny by inventing the same grappling hook as a very clumsy homage to Book 4, where Violet and Klaus switch their roles to help each other at the miserable mill. When Klaus gets into the tower, he finds a giant magnifying glass aimed at the remains of the Baudelaire mansion, implying that it was Count Olaf who burned their mansion and killed their parents. In case anyone's wondering, no, they never made it clear how the fire got started. This addition to the series is movie only. So Klaus, after dodging the hook-handed man, burns the marriage certificate, and Count Olaf gets captured. Before taking the children to live with their new guardian, Mr. Poe takes them back to their mansion, where they receive a letter that their parents had sent them while they were away in Europe.
At times the world can seem an unfriendly and sinister place, but believe us when we say that there is much more good in it than bad. All you have to do is look hard enough. And what might seem to be a series of unfortunate events may, in fact, be the first steps of a journey.
I will say this much, the scene where the children finally read the letter from their parents is a good one, despite the fact that it's shoehorned in there. A phrase which here means the producers were going to make it fit no matter how much they had to force it to make sense. After reading their letter, Mr. Poe takes them to live with their new guardian, and thus concludes the film. So overall, how is this movie? Well, I could tell you that this movie is god-awful, and that the people who made this movie really ought to lose their jobs. I could tell you that, in context of the books, this movie is garbage. I could even tell you that there is nothing in this movie that makes it worth watching. But I'd be lying. This movie isn't really all bad. The cinematography works, the sets and costume designs are pitch perfect to the books, and even most of the acting isn't half bad. With a few exceptions, of course. The only thing that makes this movie really terrible is the script, and a few of the directing decisions. Also, it's only too like Jim Carrey to make something that was originally dark into something lighthearted. I only wish this time it turned out better. But perhaps I'm being too harsh on a series of unfortunate events. Maybe there's something better coming for it in the future. And who knows? Maybe I'll even get to review something better in my near future. But for now, take care, my amazing viewers. Take care.